Hello and welcome. This is Law Noman and my name is Kristin. Thank you so much for joining us this week. Last week we covered sleep paralysis. This week we are covering black-eyed children. There are tales of people encountering scary children with pitch black eyes, but who or what are they? This definition is taken from Wikipedia, since it was the most concise description. Quote, black-eyed children, or black-eyed kids, are an American contemporary legend of paranormal creatures that resemble children between ages 6 and 16, with pale skin and black eyes, who are reportedly seen hitchhiking or begging, or are encountered on doorsteps of residential homes. End quote. The legend says that if you encounter one of these kids, you should not let them into your home, vehicle, or wherever you are. Do not give them permission. This rule makes some believe that they might be demons, since the understanding is that a demon has to be given permission in some way to inhabit someone. There is also the belief that encountering these beings may result in you developing some sort of serious illness, such as cancer, soon after the meeting. This has led to some people thinking that they might be aliens, since they emit some sort of harsh radiation, which could be the cause. Whatever these beings are, they are very creepy, and definitely not something you want to ever see. The following stories come from Thought Catalog. Midnight Caller. It almost felt like a dream. I woke up to my dog Lucy barking. She was upright on the bed where my husband and I were sleeping with our 22-month-old daughter. She was staring at our door like an unknown stranger was out there rummaging around. I thought she was just freaking out over a house noise. We'd only had her for 3 months and she was still a puppy. It could have been anything. Our roommates, a creak from the house settling, the awnings moving outside in the breeze. I wasn't too concerned initially. I decided the best bet would be to open the door and show her nothing was there. It sounds a bit silly, but it's what we do with our daughter when she gets scared, and I figured it should work with the puppy too. I opened the door and she raced to the front door. She stood there snarling at it. It was an angry, violent growl, one I had never heard her make before. I looked groggily at her and opened the baby gate blocking the doorway, planning to open the door and show her everything was okay. The second my hand reached for the deadbolt, Lucy went wild. She started barking and jumped towards me, and when I touched the metal, she suddenly changed her temper. She whimpered, almost like she was afraid and backing down. As her mannerism changed, so did mine. I wasn't calm anymore. My heart was racing and sinking at the same time. I had been flooded with a mixture of fear and dread. I looked through the peephole, and I can't explain why I looked, but I did. And outside were 2 kids. One was just a smidgen shorter than me, and didn't look much younger. I'm 21, and she looked to be 16 or 17. She was slender and pale. Her hair was a light shade of honey blonde, and she wore it long, about mid-back, with long, thin, blunt bangs in the front that covered most of her eyes. She wore jeans, a light wash that's popular right now, and a thin-looking, olive-colored pullover-style hoodie. She held the hand of a small girl, who looked around 3 or 4, in the same style jeans and a button-down ivory cardigan. The smaller one looked at the floor shyly, but had the same shade of hair tied back in a ponytail. She held a stuffed toy under her free arm, and it was identical to one my daughter has, as was their style of dress. Had it not been for the feeling of overwhelming dread and fear, I probably would have asked these children in and given them some tea or hot chocolate to get them out of the bitter cold. Something about them seemed off. At this point, I hadn't made any noise. I hadn't shushed the dog or grumbled. Nothing. I hadn't turned on any lights. These kids had no indicators that I was at the door. But the older one spoke. She had a voice that was mature, confident, strong, and accentless. She held her head tilted downward, and I couldn't see her eyes. She said, "We have to use your phone." I stood frozen in fear. How did she know I was there? She raised her head to face me directly, and that was when I saw her eyes. There was a reason I couldn't see them through her bangs before. They were black, or midnight blue, or a dark purple. They were otherworldly. She said, "Our mother is worried." As someone who has always been interested in creepy stories, I knew what she was the second she looked at me through the door. I have never been one to believe in these things. As a staunch atheist and skeptic when it comes to the paranormal, I had written off many a ghost story from friends and family members eager to tell their tale. I didn't believe it. Still, I couldn't rationalize my way out of this. I was standing with nothing but a thin wooden door between me and a black-eyed kid. There was no questioning what was right in front of me. I did not answer her. Slowly and silently, I backed away from the door, Lucy still cowering at my ankles. She kept talking. "Just let us in to use your phone." I took another step back, and with that step, the tone changed. At first, she had seemed polite. When I took that second step back, she became commanding, almost hostile. "We're not going to hurt you. If we wanted to do that, we would have broken in." "I'll ask again. May we come in and use your phone?" Lucy snarled at the door, and I inched backward, though something inside me seemed to be slowly pulling me back toward the door. It wasn't a physical pulling so much as a subconscious need to go back and let them in. I got to my room, covered up the window, locked the door, and sat there in the dim light of the nightlight. I heard her call me back to the door once more, and then there was quiet. I didn't go back to sleep that night, and I haven't slept right since. I know from reading about them that black-eyed kids can't just come in without permission. I know they haven't hurt anyone, but I still fear I'll be the exception. When I told my husband, he said it was just a dream. He keeps telling me to forget it, but this lingering feeling of sadness, this dread when the house is silent at night, this fear of a knock at the door, this tells me otherwise. Bus encounter. I was riding the bus back home after work. It was around 1 a.m. I'm a security guard and often work odd hours. So I'm sitting there, and this guy gets on the bus, sits across from me. He was wearing a suit. He had a briefcase, regular-looking guy in his 20s. What struck me about him at first was that he was chewing a cigar, not smoking it. You can't smoke on the bus. So I was just looking at him while he stared out the window and chewed his cigar. And all of a sudden he turned and looked at me. His eyes were pitch black. My heart started beating, and I felt my pulse rising. I was starting to panic, and I had no idea why. I was just so terrified of this guy. Then he grinned at me, and his teeth were all covered in tobacco bits and brown juice, and the cigar was clamped between them. I almost screamed, but instead I had the presence of mind to just get up and take the seat right behind the driver. I calmed down a bit after that, but I kept an eye on that guy. He ended up chatting with some girl that got on, and they were still talking when I got off. I later convinced myself he was just trolling me, having fun with a pair of contact lenses. But now I wonder. Halloween. I'd never heard of black-eyed kids before this incident. I'm a domestic engineer living in North Texas. I don't believe in the paranormal, ghosts, demons, aliens, whatever. But I had something happen to me this Halloween, and I have to admit it has me scratching my head. It had been a slow trick-or-treat night in our neighborhood that evening, which is kinda odd. We usually have kids from different areas dropped off in ours, and there's a constant parade at our door. That night, I'd say we'd had no more than 8 to 10 groups of kids come by the entire night. It was around 9:30 p.m. and my husband and I were sitting in our family room watching some of those ghost shows based on actual events. Like I said, I don't believe in that stuff, but I do like a good ghost story now and then, and it was Halloween after all. We hadn't had any activity at the door in over an hour, and it was getting late, so we decided to turn off the porch lights and let our dog Chloe out of her crate. Chloe is an American bulldog, and she's very docile. We only put her in a crate because we were afraid she'd try to get out and play with all the kids, and I didn't want to have to chase after her down the street. Also, we didn't want her to scare any of the kids because she might look a little intimidating to the younger ones. So I turned the outside light off and let Chloe out, and she followed me back to the couch and lay down at my feet. It was getting close to 10 p.m. and my husband decided he'd had enough fun for the night and was going upstairs. He was going to take a shower and get ready for bed. After all, it was a Thursday and he still had to get up early the next day. My teenage son was out with his friends at the local haunted house and he wasn't expected back for another hour or so. That left me alone on the couch with Chloe. Now, just because I don't believe doesn't mean those shows don't freak me out a bit. And being alone now watching, I'd have to say that I was kind of on edge. It wasn't long after I heard the upstairs water for the shower turn on, and then there was a light knock, knock, knock at the front door. My initial reaction was, really? It's almost 10, go home. But soon an uneasy feeling came over me. Why the knock? Our doorbell glows, and in the dark without the porch light on, it would be extra obvious to anyone out there. I paused. I couldn't really just ignore it. Our front door has a big beveled glass panel, and anybody right at the door could see in enough to see someone was in the family room watching TV. It would be pretty rude for me to just sit there and not answer it. Knock, knock, knock. Again from the door. I glanced down at Chloe, but she was gone. My gaze followed her usual path to the front door, expecting her to be on the way, as she normally does. But she wasn't there. I stood up and looked around the room, and I found her, crouching by the back door like she was wanting out. However, she never asks to go out like that. She always comes and licks my hand or puts her head on my knee. This was totally out of character for her, and I have to say it heightened my anxiety. "Chloe, crate," I said. She just turned back to look at me like, "Hell no, lady, I ain't moving." I yelled up to my husband, but if he was already in the shower, I knew there was no chance of him hearing me. Knock, knock, knock. About that time, a car drove down our street and cast just enough light on the door to where I could see the silhouettes of two small children through the glass. I instantly felt relief. It was just some kids, probably a couple of my neighbors on their way back home that wanted to stop by and show me their costume or something. I headed to the door and looked back to make sure Chloe wasn't going to follow. What a great watchdog, I thought to myself as she just sat there. I turned on the porch light when I got to the door, and sure enough, I could see through the glass that it was a couple of pretty small kids. A little late for such young ones, I thought, and I began to wonder about what kind of parents would let their kids run the streets that late at night. I only opened the door enough to where I could block Chloe's escape if she decided to come and try and get out. What struck me immediately as odd was that the kids weren't wearing any costumes. They were in normal street clothes. Also, there was no customary trick-or-treat either. I began to feel very uneasy again. It was a girl and a boy. The girl to my left was older. I'd say around 11 or 12 years old. I could tell she was blonde, but I couldn't make out any distinct features as our lights are from high above and on the columns on the front porch, so most of the light was coming from behind them. I hadn't opened the door wide enough for any light from inside to hit them directly. The boy was younger and about a foot shorter. I'd say around 8 or 9 years old, and he seemed to have light brown hair. The girl very politely spoke up. "Ma'am, can we please come inside and use your phone to call our mom?" As she spoke, something in the pit of my stomach was telling me something was wrong. What kid, even at that age, doesn't have a cell phone of their own these days? I couldn't remember the last time I'd had anybody ask to use my home phone. Hun, don't you have a phone of your own you can call your mom on?" I asked. This was when things got really weird. Both kids turned to look at one another like they were going to say something to one another, but neither spoke. They both looked to me and the girl said, "Ma'am, my cell phone battery doesn't have any charge left in it. Can we please come inside and call our mother? We're alone out here and my brother is scared." I have to admit there were two competing feelings going on inside me. The first, that of a mother's heart that wanted to help these two small children get to their mom. The other, a sinking fear in my gut that was keeping the other feeling at bay. It was then I noticed that during the short conversation, I'd already opened the door a few extra inches, which I was completely unaware of doing. I stopped. "Honey, why don't you give me your mother's number and I can call her myself?" Another pause, and they looked at one another. After a short moment, they turned back to me and the girl said, "Ma'am, my little brother has to use your bathroom. Can we please come inside while you call our mom?" And with that last statement, the little girl moved closer toward the door, like she was just going to walk in, right by me. As she did so, she stepped into the light that was coming from inside the house, and I got my first really good look at her. Solid, jet black eyes. That's all I could see. That motherly instinct was gone and replaced by terror I don't think I've ever felt in my life. I could feel every hair on my arms and back of my neck standing at attention. I closed the door to where just my face was able to stick out. The little girl stopped and again pleaded. "Please, ma'am, we're really scared and alone out here. We have to come inside. Please help us." Then, like on cue, both kids began to whimper and cry. That's when the fear took over and I shut and locked the door. "I'll call your mom if you give me the number," I shouted through the door. "But I'm not letting you in my house." I could still see them stand there on the porch, just staring at me through the beveled glass pane. Part of me wanted to run upstairs to my husband, but the bigger part didn't want to lose track of where they were. That would have freaked me out even more. After what seemed like forever, but was probably only a few seconds, I decided I'd call my neighbor that lives across the street. As I made my way to the side table by our couch to my phone, I glanced at the back door. Chloe was nowhere to be found. We later found her in the guest room under the bed. When I got to my phone and started to look for the neighbor's contact info, it was only then that the kids stepped away from the door and began to walk to the street. As they did, I walked to the door to get a better look to see where they went, still not calling my neighbor. If you get close enough to the glass, you can see out enough to make out people's shapes, but you can't see much detail. Of course, standing that close to the door would make you pretty obvious to anyone outside looking in. From the door, I could see that the kids were still standing under the street lamp nearest my house, staring at me. As I lifted my phone to my ear after calling, only then did the kids start walking down our street. I met my neighbor out under the lamp once he was out there, but the kids were nowhere to be seen. Like I said, I don't believe in any of this stuff, and I'd never even heard about black-eyed kids before talking to my friend. What I really think, what I have to think, is these kids were just out yanking people's chains on Halloween night. But I will say this for them, they were good. Really good at it. They scared the hell out of me and my dog. You must let me in. On March 17th, 2008, I had my one and only encounter with a black-eyed kid. Before my experience, I had never even heard of anything having to do with black-eyed kids. I was 12. I was sitting outside of a hairdresser's in an old Chevy pickup waiting for my mom to get her hair cut. About 15 minutes had passed and I saw some kid walking back and forth along the sidewalk in front of the parked car. At first I thought I recognized him as one of my friends from school, so I banged on the front windshield until he looked my way. It wasn't anyone I knew. At this point I wasn't scared at all. Not yet. The boy walked over to the side of the car and just stared. I think to let me get a good look at his eyes, I'm not sure, to freak me out, but let me tell you, if you have never seen a black-eyed kid, you have no idea what to imagine. Pupils black as the night sky. The boy whispered, "You must let me in." And then I locked the car doors and ducked down into the space below the seats. 5 minutes later, he was gone. When my mother got into the car, she told me that a boy with black eyes had come into the hairdressers and insisted for my mother to give him keys to the car. She refused. Thank God she did. Trick or treat? This really freaked me out. Yesterday I noticed my neighbor hadn't put out all of his Halloween decorations and lights, etc. The past 2 years I've lived next to him, he's gone all out for Halloween. I don't know him well. He's younger, single, but I know he likes kids. I mean, not in a creepy way. His brother and sister-in-law and their kids are always visiting him, and he plays with his 3 young nieces and nephews out in the yard. So, anyway, I got home from work and was walking up my driveway, and I saw him outside and said something like, "Hey man, you better get your Halloween stuff up, or that house up the street is going to beat you for best decorations." He kind of smiles sheepishly and says that he's actually going to keep his house dark this year and just put candy out. I asked him if he was going out of town, but he said no. Something happened last year that really scared him. Now, I was concerned for my own safety. If some weirdos were coming around our neighborhood, which was pretty safe considering tons of young families were living there. So, I asked him what happened. He said last year he had his brother's family over so they could trick-or-treat in the neighborhood, since they live in an apartment complex and they don't do much for Halloween there. He had a bunch of kids come to the door, as always. His family took off around 10:30 and there were only a few older trick-or-treaters. But by 11:30 they were pretty much done. So he was inside watching TV and the doorbell rang. He grabbed the candy bowl and headed over, noticing that it's a little past midnight and that's pretty rude for trick-or-treaters to still be out. But then he notices he hasn't turned off all his decoration lights yet, so his house is still a beacon. He swings the door open and is about to yell "boo" or something to freak them out, but stops dead when he sees the kids at the door. He said one was probably around 13 to 14 and the other around 16 to 17, both boys. They weren't dressed up, but he remembers the older one was wearing a flannel checkered shirt. He was immediately overcome with uneasiness, like opening the door was a huge mistake. They just stared at him, and he noticed they had really big irises and dilated pupils. He couldn't even see the whites of their eyes, so he figured they were contact lenses. He was frozen there holding the candy bowl, like he couldn't slam the door in their face as much as he wanted to. So he nervously tried to smile at them, hoping they would, quote, break character and ask for candy or something. The younger one said that they had gotten lost and needed to come in and use his phone. That was when he closed the door more than halfway on them and said, "No, sorry." And the other one said something like, "Can we just wait in your house until our parents come get us?" But by then he was convinced that his life was in danger and these kids must be high on something or intending to rob him, and he just kept mumbling, "No, sorry, good night," as he inched the door closed and locked it. He told me he was so scared at that point that they were going to try and break in through one of his windows or something. But he looked through the people and they had turned to leave. He watched TV with the volume really low so he could hear any sounds at all. And he stayed up till like 5 a.m. because he was too scared to go to bed and drop his guard. The whole time he's telling me, I'm thinking this, oh man, this sounds so familiar, just like the Black-Eyed Kids legend. Then I thought, hey, maybe this dude is trying to scare me because after all he does have the Halloween spirit. So I'm looking at him incredulously, but trying not to seem too gullible. So I said, "Man, that is really crazy. Sounds like the Black-Eyed Kids." He just looks at me blankly. "The what? Is that a movie or something?" And I said no, but told him to go look it up online. Like an hour later, I get a knock on my door, and admittedly almost jump out of my skin thinking it's a demon child. It was my neighbor, and his eyes were freaking huge. He swears to me up and down that he had never heard of the Black-Eyed Kids before, and it's so similar to what happened to him. So we talked for a while longer, and I told him that quite a few people probably know about that urban legend, and it's possible it was just teenagers with black scleral contacts trying to freak people out on Halloween. But he said the fear he felt was so primal and came over him the second he opened the door for them. Every story I've read about them is from someone who already knew about them. Last night was like any other night. I was switching between listening to music and watching YouTube videos with one headphone in so I can hear my infant daughter if she cries. That way my wife can get a full night's sleep. She works at 4 a.m. at the hospital every day. So I decided to go lay down in the spare bed in the baby's room. As soon as I dozed off, I heard a thumping sound coming from the front porch. Startled at first, I opened my eyes, and then I scanned the room. Realizing that it was most likely my cat scratching himself on the porch, I dozed back off. Then again, I heard the thumping. "Damn cat," I said as I got out of bed to run him off the porch, only to see he wasn't there anymore. Now that I was up again, I wasn't the least bit tired. I figured I'd just get some tea, check Facebook, and maybe finish the web series I was watching on YouTube. A few minutes into the video, I felt the sudden urge to look up at the kitchen window. And there they were, the tops of two short-statured people's heads cresting the stairs just above the window frame. The people were just short enough to not see in the window, but I could see out. I heard no footsteps on my porch, and my stomach turned. The knock, knock, knock was a steady, hollow thump, the very same thump I had just blamed on my cat. Deciding it was not best to answer, I shut my laptop and crept by the door back to the baby's room. I assumed it was some of the people from the low-income housing across the road from me that were high or hiding from the cops, or maybe looking for my cousin who stays with me often and has many friends over there. The last thing I needed was to try to explain to two stoners that I was trying to sleep even though it was 2 a.m. It wasn't until I got to my daughter's room that the creepiness set in. The thump had moved from the kitchen to the bedroom windows. Both windows, a room apart, thumping in perfect time. These stoners were going to wake up my daughter if I didn't run them off now. Angry, I went out to the kitchen, unlocked and opened the door to run around the side of the house and kick some butt. Then it happened. Standing there looking up at me were two 10 or 11-year-old boys. The feeling of dread and the smell of mold almost made me vomit. The smaller of the two then spoke. "May we use your telegraph?" "Huh?" I just stared blankly at the boys, horrified of what I then realized. Their eyes were pitch black. He again asked me to use the telegraph. There wasn't a sound to be heard. No crickets chirping, no dogs barking, no cars driving by. Nothing. I tried to play it cool and ignore the fact that he didn't say telephone, or phone, or cell, mobile, anything that would have made sense in the situation, and I calmly replied, "I don't have service at my house. Sorry." The expressions on their faces turned to rage as I finished my sentence. Swiftly I shut the door and locked it as quickly as I could. Then I stumbled back to protect my daughter. I picked her up from her crib and held her close. The fact that she didn't wake up freaked me out the most, but I managed to gather my senses enough to make sure she was still breathing and warm. Everything seemed okay with her. The thumping on the windows was back. I dropped to the floor as close to the wall as I could and held my little girl in my arms and wept like a child. I felt helpless and afraid. I lied there for what felt like hours and hours of crying and shaking until I heard it. My wife's alarm clock. The thumping stopped the instant the alarm went off, and I crept into the master bedroom with the baby. "What's wrong with you?" my wife asked. "I just had a bad dream," is all I could mutter out. "Okay, well, give me the baby so I can feed her before work." I handed my wife the baby, and she fed her like any normal day. I turned on every light in the house and made coffee for her. For some reason, just having her awake calmed my nerves enough to pretend like nothing happened. I walked her out to her car nervously with the baby in my arms. I asked her not to leave until I walked back in the house. She was put off by the request, but she did so to humor me. Once I was safely inside the house, I locked the door again. And when I was in the house, I just sat horrified until she got home. I insisted we go to the next town over and stay at the weekend at my brother's house. And here I sit, horrified, while she sleeps in the guest room with my daughter, wondering why they stopped when the alarm went off. I think I know the answer. I was aware of the black-eyed kids and she wasn't. Every story I've read about them is from someone who already knew about them. Maybe, just maybe, knowledge of them existing is the only reason they visit. I'm afraid, and I'm sorry. No, you won't be calling anybody. The incident took place about 13 years ago. I had just moved to a new city with my wife. We were small-town newlyweds from the Midwest. We moved cross-country to one of the biggest cities in the Southwest so I could attend graduate school. Being naive and new to city living, I habitually answered the door without a second thought. Never again after this. The first thing that should have tipped me off to the peculiarity of the situation was the fact that someone was knocking at 6 in the morning. The second thing that should have dawned on me is this kid had to reach over a rather tall patio gate to unlatch and open it. The knock at the door was startling. My wife and I were getting ready for work, a pretty normal routine. The moment I opened the door, I was overtaken with an inexplicable sense of fear. To this day I can picture him. Teenager, average height, average build, knee-length black leather coat, short black hair, and sunglasses. The sunglasses at 6 a.m., that struck me as odd, and even more odd that he was eating an apple. He was very polite, and asked if he could come in and warm up. I said, "No," closed the door, and slid the security chain in place. A moment later, another knock. I opened the now chained door, and before I could speak, he again asked if he could come in and warm up. "No," I replied, and attempted to close the door. Before the door could shut, he put his hand out and stopped the door on its hinges. He looked directly into my eyes, still wearing his glasses, and said, "Can I at least get some ketchup for my apple?" "What? No," I replied, a bit confused. "Get the hell out of here. My wife is calling the police." He took a minute to let this information sink in. He lowered his glasses, and he revealed eyes as black as obsidian, and he says, "No, you won't be calling anybody." At that moment, I forced the door closed, locked it, and called out to my wife. She is scared out of her mind, hiding in the bedroom. All jacked up on adrenaline, I ripped the curtains back to look out the window next to the door. He's gone. Absolutely no trace of him. I went out onto the patio and checked the gate. It's still latched from the inside. And that freaked me out. And I thought to myself how strange and scary that was. And I turned to enter the house and noticed a half-eaten apple lying on the ground. A visceral experience. I'd be lying if I told you I didn't know about black-eyed kids before this happened to me. It was late summer last year. Let me tell you about my neighborhood. I live in a poor part of town. It's a bit ghetto, a bit of the barrio, a bit of the lower economic class of a cross-section of races. It's Los Angeles. The apartment complex spans a short block, and it's dusty brown like the desert we live in. It's got 2 pools, lots of little Mexican children, and, for the most part, a pretty friendly population. I am a destitute writer trying to make it in Hollywood, so I spend my free time writing. So when this happened, I was working mostly in the mornings and afternoons. I would get home, hit the gym, and then settle in for an evening in front of the computer. It's pretty common for the evenings in the summer to be chaotic around our apartment complex. Kids playing in the pool, the ice cream man pushing his cart up and down the sidewalk, women talking outside the laundry room. You know, nice, low income but pleasant. Like a mixed-race 21st century version of a 50s sitcom. And people will knock on your door. sometimes to borrow something. I cook a lot, so neighbors pop by to find out the origins of the great aromas wafting from my kitchen window. Sometimes it's for a little help working on a broken down car, but mostly it's kids selling candy bars or Christmas wrapping paper, or jittery tweakers selling magazine subscriptions, or old Mexican men selling bootleg DVDs, and lots of Jehovah's Witnesses. Because it's hot out, I leave my windows open. Air conditioning isn't cheap and I've got no money, remember? So I was hoping for a cross breeze. So that means, though, I can't see anyone from where I sit and work, but I can hear them very clearly as they walk up to the door. So when I hear someone knock, I answer it. Besides buying the occasional candy bar, I smile politely, decline, and wish them a nice day and send them off. No big deal. This evening, though, it was quiet, which was strange in and of itself. I should at least have been able to hear the distant sound of ranchero music. I heard a couple of people walk up to my door. I'm not the first apartment in my courtyard, so usually I hear the salespeople as they knock on my neighbors' doors, and they work their way around to me. Not this time, though. Whoever it was walked right up to my door and knocked. I got up to answer it, reaching for the door handle when a chill went through my body like I have never experienced. A cold tightness in my chest. I halted my hand movement towards the door handle and placed it flat on the door, as if I was feeling for heat from a fire. I have a peephole on my door, but it never crossed my mind to use it. I stood there with my hand flat on the door and listened. They knocked again. I don't scare easily, and I wasn't exactly afraid, but I was having a visceral experience all over my body. A base fear reaction. And just like I could hear them, they had heard me move to the door. They knew I was inside. Yes, I said. Who is it? A boy's voice answered. We need to use your phone. Yeah, that's not gonna happen. I started laughing. I stress laugh when I'm in pain or under pressure. They heard me laughing, and neither of us moved for about a minute or two. A really long minute or two. Finally, they walked away, not to any of the other of the 8 doorways within 15 feet, not to ask anyone else. Before they could have gone more than a dozen yards, curiosity reasserted itself, and I yanked the door open, running after them to see who it was and where they were headed. The courtyard of my complex was completely empty. Afterwards, I thought the experience fit the stories about black-eyed kids, and I kicked myself for not opening the door. Coming face to face with black-eyed kids? How cool would that have been? But then I remember that feeling, my skin crawling, and the certain knowledge in me at that moment. There was no way in hell I was opening that door at that time. They were on my balcony. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm in my early 20s, I just moved into this apartment, and I tend to live a very private life. I don't even have a Facebook account. I work during the day at a grocery store. Okay, so I'm walking up my flights of stairs to get to my apartment, and I hear these kids laughing, and then I heard whispering. It was kind of late, so I thought this was weird, but I ignored it and walked into my apartment. I live on the 3rd floor. I was getting ready to open my balcony door. It was really humid in my apartment. I walked over to the door and pulled my blinds, and 2 kids are staring back at me. I screamed and backed away, smashing my leg into the table. They were both in blue jeans, and the oldest, he was taller, he had on a green shirt with white stripes, and the younger was in a button-up light blue shirt. The oldest one touched the sliding door. Hey, miss, can you let us in? The younger one just kept looking around, and I still just stared at them. I finally was able to say, How did you get onto my balcony? I walked to the door and noticed how excited the older one got. He moved closer to the entrance. Can you let us in? I wasn't thinking. I unlocked the door, and when I looked up to their eyes were black, the entire eye. I quickly locked the door and told them I had to call the police because my door was jammed and I couldn't unlock the door. So I called the police. The oldest boy pleaded with me the entire time to let them in. The police arrived, and they came in and walked to the balcony. When they opened the door, nothing was there. They looked down and saw 2 children running in the parking lot away from the building. The police took a report and said that those kids had to have had help getting up there because they couldn't have got there on their own. So I'm scared. I don't feel safe going out again. Those were just some stories about black-eyed kids. Really creepy kids that you hope you never encounter. So next time you hear a knock on your door, make sure you look out the window before you let them in. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you would like to send in your creepy stories or true crime stories, you can do so at info@lawnoman.com. Please visit our website, lawandnoman.com, for all information as well as the show notes. You can find us on all major streaming platforms and on social media at Law and Omen. We have Patreon and merch if you would like to support us. Thank you so much for listening. We appreciate you being here with us. Have an amazing week. Stay safe. Until next week. Bye.